After our next speaker, I'm going to ask Dan Yergin to come on stage. Dan, of course, needs no introduction to an energy conference like this one. Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Prize, author of The Quest, founder of Cambridge Energy Research Associates, vice chairman of IHS, recently awarded the United States Energy Award for lifelong achievements in energy and the promotion of international understanding. He's written numerous books and articles, won numerous awards, serves on numerous boards, including the Center on Global Energy Policies. And on a personal note, I've just been incredibly lucky that he's been such a generous mentor and friend to me and is so committed to our success here at the center. There's no better demonstration of that commitment than his even being here today after the exhausting week that he just had hosting probably the world's premier energy conference, CERAWeek, in Houston. Dan will come on stage in a minute and speak with John Hickenlooper, the governor of Colorado. And few governors, I think, are better able to speak to the complex set of energy issues that we're discussing today. He's a former geologist in the oil patch who saw firsthand the ups and downs in the oil industry. Later went on to be a very successful entrepreneur in the microbrewery business. He became the mayor of Denver without ever having held elective office before that, and in that role championed environmental issues like boosting energy efficiency, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, promoting green urban design. And today he runs a state that really is a true all-of-the-above energy state, a recognized leader in solar, wind, geothermal, and also oil, gas, and coal. And the first state to pass a voter-approved renewable energy standard. He's a moderate in the most purple, one of the most purple of states, and so he's had to moderate a host of controversial issues, including how to navigate the sharply divided views in his state about shale, oil, and gas development, which we're familiar with here in New York State. So we have much to discuss with him, and we're really grateful to him for traveling to New York today to be with us. Please join me in welcoming the governor of Colorado, John Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Jason. And people generally say that when I left the oil and gas business in 1986, which was not my choice, if you remember the recession, the price collapse back then, I went from one liquid to the other, from going from the oil and gas business to the beer. I opened the first brew pub in the Rocky Mountains and then ended up opening brew pubs across the country. They asked me to keep this to 5 minutes. I think I'll just make it a couple of minutes so we can do more questions and answers. 2 points I just want to make, and I was about a month ago spoke at APAC in Washington at their national conference on energy, and I think the remarkable energy transformation we've seen in the United States really is impacting the rest of the world as well. Obviously, in the U.S., we know that the basic facts that oil production has increased dramatically. Natural gas is now abundant and at a stable, low price without the huge fluctuations we'd seen before. Renewable energies are flourishing. In Israel, through these innovations and shale gas discoveries, we've seen the largest offshore discovery of natural gas of the past decade, some significant reserves onshore. I was asked at APAC how I viewed the role of OPEC and its impact on our long-term security. And what I said was I'm not even sure the question is relevant, just because the answer shows that energy doesn't just power our lives, it powers geopolitical change. The answer is relevant. The U.S. is on the cusp of energy independence. That's going to take a little longer because of the drop in prices. But Israel is achieving energy independence with their offshore discoveries, Tamar and Leviathan. What that really means is that OPEC is the past, and their leverage over the economies of the world has been significantly diminished. And I think now the United States and Israel and many other countries are no longer as beholden to OPEC. We really control our own fates. I think energy presents the biggest opportunity for democracy and stability in the Middle East and ultimately across the world. And the other point, the second point I want to make is that the innovation, this connection of horizontal drilling with hydraulic fracturing, so many people thought, and many people still think, it's a binary innovation, right? So it's like a faucet that we turn on or turn off, that before we had this innovation, we couldn't get shale gas. Now we can get shale gas. But that's a much too simplistic way of looking at it. What the truth is that, so we turned it on, and now we're really turning it on. And it's the type of innovation that's going to continue to create more innovations, and the yields that they're going to get per foot of drilled wells is going to continue to increase, and that increase in production is going to accelerate because of the drop in price. The large service companies like Halliburton and Schlumberger and the others are all going to really push their research, and as that increased efficiency and cost effectiveness continues to increase, it's going to expand the role that widespread fuel recoveries are to create independence in terms of our democracies and providing stronger roles for energy or for stability and freedom. To a certain extent, I look at a conference like this, that's a lot of what this conference is about, is really changing the world with energy. And I look back to when I was a geologist in the early 1980s and how I looked at the world both geopolitically and as an energy landscape. And the transformation has been so beyond anything I could imagine then. And yet, looking back, it almost seems predictable. And I think the hard part is looking at the next 10 or 15 years and really trying to predict how this continuing acceleration of effectiveness and efficiency out of our producing wells is going to continue to change how we view democracy in the world. So let's get on with the questions.
Governor, let me echo Jason and certainly welcome you here to what has become a very important energy conference. You just made the comment these changes in energy are important to the country. They're very important to the state of Colorado. As you noted, you had the experience in you know a lot about cycles because you were laid off in one cycle on July 5th, 1986. And went into other courses, as Jason suggested. So share with us today both how this unconventional revolution is affecting the state of Colorado, and also, at this point in the cycle, how the downturn is affecting the state of Colorado.
So it took us, these innovations in exploration and production, took us from being a mature oil and gas state to being one of the hottest states, and we're I think 7th in oil production and 6th in natural gas production in the country, but it really has also transformed our cities, the expansion of our workforce. These are very valuable jobs to our economy. The downturn, and so far, in March we predicted a 10% loss of employment in the industry over the course of this year. It looks like we still are holding to that 10%. In terms of severance taxes, most of our production is on private land or is on federal land. We don't have that much state land, so we are not as dependent on the severance taxes. So it's going to have a negative effect, but it will be muted.
Right. You've been at the center of a number of energy controversies, and we'll talk about the three of them that stand out because they're so central to this. But as you stand back and your experience, public life and private life, why is there this tendency towards polarization over these energy issues?
Well, there are a lot of reasons. Polarization is pretty much everywhere right now, and we could spend the next 30 minutes just talking about that. Specifically within the oil and gas industry, the widespread application of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing has brought exploration and production into suburban neighborhoods in a way that no other innovation ever has. And that has given a lot of fuel, a lot of energy to the anti-oil and gas, the really strong environmentalists that have always been against oil and gas and thought that we should have been solar, renewable energies 25 years ago. And they now have a platform to get people with more moderate views are sympathetic to saying, well, how can you have an industrial operation, 500 feet or 700 feet from a suburban neighborhood, and it's created a great deal of controversy.
So that's one of the major environmental issues that you wrestled with. It was going to be on the ballot in 2014. Instead, you set up a commission, and to address this as one of the questions around unconventional, what did the commission come up with, and how has it set the course for the future? And were you surprised by any of the outcomes from it?
Yeah, and just as a context, so we were going to have a couple of constitutional amendments on our 2014 ballot that were pretty extreme, right? Banning fracking or 2,500-foot mandatory setbacks for any new well drilled. We negotiated with the people that were supporting those somewhat extreme measures and said, well, what we're going to do in exchange, why don't we create a task force, a commission, and put, 1/3 of the people represent different perspectives in the oil and gas industry, 1/3 will be different perspectives in the environmental / local control industry perspective. And these are people that think that mayors or city council members or county commissioners should have the absolute right to ban oil and gas exploration, within the confines of community. And then 1/3 independent people that are not from either camp. And this was the compromise we agreed to. And we had former Secretary of State, we had a former Speaker of the House, we had a former Supreme Court Justice as part of those independent voices. And we said that we would have a 2/3 majority before we would forward anything to the legislature. They met for about 3 months, and they came to genuine conclusions. And I think it was one of the first times that we had members of API, large oil and gas companies, that were recognizing the need for some local control and giving it. Now, local communities weren't offered the veto power to say you can't explore or produce right in these places, but they were given a voice, really, for the first time. And I think now the legislature has passed and approved budgets for additional inspectors, some of these other moderate compromises that really are giving those local communities the right to make sure that their air and their water isn't in any way moderated.
So you found a way to come to an equilibrium on this issue.
Certainly my perspective and most people's perspective. Now, some of the, again, more extreme environmental folks said, well, you guys never answered the question. You never proposed anything about getting real local control. Well, as I answered, we did. This commission, with our smartest and brightest people, most experienced and wisest individuals, said that we shouldn't have veto power through local control.
Because, of course, there is also a question of mineral rights and ownership rights.
It's in our state constitution, the right of private property and the right to access those minerals, as long as you can do so in such a way that doesn't harm the surface owner, irreparably.
One of the other tough questions you tackled was methane, and how did you get that one fixed?
Well, that was a couple years ago, and again, we went to the larger, some of the really responsible companies in Colorado, Anadarko, Noble, and Canna, and we said, you're losing the public relations battle, and we recognize, we all know there's a lot of fugitive emissions. We should address this. And this discussion, after about 6 or 7 months, they agreed to come to the table. We had the Environmental Defense Fund and Fred Krupp's team. Both they and the industry provided experts. We had local environmental groups that worked on this for 4 months. They debated what were the facts, and then they sat down, rolled up their sleeves, and came up with...
So the first thing was that they had to come to an agreement on what the actual...
Exactly.
Yeah.
My son was a big stickler for the fact. He said, we got into a fight one time, and he said, Daddy, what do you do at work that's so hard? Make decisions, get the facts, make a decision, check, next. It was the next day that I said, at that time I said, you're right, 5th grade is harder than being governor. But the next day I realized that that's easy to say, get the facts, make a decision, check next, if you all agree on the facts. So we had, the experts from Anadarko and Noble and Canna working with the environmental experts, agreeing on the facts, and then our commitment to the industry was that A, we'd make sure that we didn't create any red tape or bureaucracy, B, every dollar they spent would actually make the air cleaner, and C, they'd get credit. It wouldn't be the environmental community just coming and getting all the credit, they would share credit, which when we announced these regulations, and Colorado was the first state to regulate methane, we had the senior executives from the oil and gas industry as well as the senior executives from the environmental community, both on the podium, both, saying this is success.
So how do you, so what lesson would you take away from that for other states and for the country as a whole?
Well, I think that it's work, and it's not very glamorous, and I'm not sure the public always appreciates it, but making sure that everyone's in the room and that everyone's, we started off, what are the outcomes we want, right? We recognize we've got some significant air pollution. What is going to give us the greatest reduction for the lowest cost, and how do we get there with the least bureaucracy? And once we kind of agreed that that was going to be our goal, and then got the facts together, it's doable. And I think what's interesting is that I was talking to one of the executives from, actually from Noble and Anadarko, and they say in the first couple of years of implementation, they're already finding ways within their staff to deliver the reducing these fugitive emissions with lower costs. So they're finding different gauges and techniques and methodologies so that they can achieve these outcomes. Originally, it was going to be $60 to $80 million a year of additional costs. And again, this was a voluntary rulemaking with the industry and the environmental community. I think now we're going to get down, at some point, given another 2 or 3 years, we'll get this down to $30 or $40 million a year. And, that's kind of the history of the environmental regulation, right? It's an incremental step after step after step that we continue to make sure we do it at the lowest possible cost with the least amount of turbulence.
So how would you rank Colorado in terms of as a regulator of this activity?
Well, I argue that we're the most rigorous. I mean, we try to be the most pro-business, but I think we have about the most rigorous set of regulations, but they weren't made in a vacuum. In other words, the industry was side by side as we created these regulations, and I think that's the most efficient way to do regulations. And I think, again, we're the first state to get to methane regulation. By doing regulations in that way, you get the participation of your industry as well as your environmental community.
So there's a lot of, been a lot of debate whether the federal government should regulate this activity more because you can't trust the states, or the states should do it because they're actually closer to the local situation and they understand it more and more in touch with the community. Kind of where do you come out on this debate?
Well, I'm sure we'll talk about the EPA and some of their new regulations they're looking at.
I promise you we will.
But I chaired, a couple of years ago, I chaired the Western Governors Association. And just in the last 6 months, I think we're coming close to a consensus that all the Western governors of these Western states are going to agree to harmonize our oil and gas regulations. So, and what that means, of course, in the modern world, no one's going to reduce their regulations and say, all right, well, we can afford to have a little dirtier air or a little dirtier water. It means that everyone's going to come up to the stiffest standards of their neighboring states. But if we do that, and all of a sudden we have 14 states that all agree that this is how we regulate methane, this is how we regulate, spills. If we get to that point, then I think it reduces the federal government's argument that they need to come in, because if the states, part of the federal argument is that there's too much difference between the states, and that there are vacuums and pockets of non-regulation that are putting people at risk. And I think if the states can come together and do this on their own, and I think to a large extent the Obama administration agrees with this, if we can do it ourselves, they won't feel the need to come in and impose a set of federal regulations.
Have you had a chance yet to look at the new Department of Interior regulations about shale development on federal lands?
We are looking at them in detail, but certainly we are concerned.
Concerned because? Well,
it has the potential to set, again, different sets of regulations between what the state has regulated and then what we're going to have oil and gas companies having to do very different regulations on
sort of next door
adjacent properties, which really doesn't make much sense. So we're hoping, and we've talked to I'm a great fan of Sally Jewell, the Secretary of the Interior. I think she's a remarkable leader and really is approaching this in a balanced way. And I think we just need to sit down and kind of work through this. My goal would be that if an oil and gas company, whether they're going to drill on private land or state land or federal land, it should be the same application, the same permit application, and the same bureaucracy that they should deal with. We shouldn't be trying to tie them up just to slow them down.
Instead of 3 different. Well, here we are in New York State, and with your own experience of what you've observed in Colorado, approaching as a geologist, how do you see Governor Cuomo's ban on shale gas development in the poorer parts of New York State?
Well, and just watching Governor Cuomo right now in a serious battle with one of the strongest Democratic constituencies, the teachers union, and he is fighting for, this assessment, this whole notion of having high standards for all our students and Common Core standards with appropriate assessment, and he's not backing down. So I just want to say at the outset, I have tremendous admiration for Governor Cuomo on a lot of fronts. We disagree on this in terms of the oil and gas exploration activity. He is still very concerned that whether it can be done safely. And I think in a lot of parts of the country, we're demonstrating that it can be done safely. Now, in New York, the producing horizons are closer to groundwater than they are in most parts of the West. But again, making sure that you guarantee wellbore integrity, making sure that you monitor for fugitive emissions, I think there's a way that he can do that. And if they can find a way to do that, it is certainly in places like Western New York where it's difficult to get high-paying jobs and industries that can really expand across a whole part of the state like that. It would have a very, very profound impact, a beneficial impact on Western New York. But let me make sure I am not, Governor Cuomo is managing at a level far larger and more complex than mine, and I am in no way meaning that as a criticism. It's just that we disagree on that, whether we can do that safely.
Yeah, and I guess from the experience of Colorado, the answer is you can do it safely if it's properly regulated.
Absolutely. Well, and I think, Governor Cuomo, I think, is one of the, and I mean this sincerely, I think he's one of the brightest governors. I'm the chair of the National Governors Association. I know almost all the governors in the country, and Governor Cuomo is, I think, one of the best. But he's obviously going very, very slowly in this regard.
Right. Well, we just had Gina McCarthy here, the EPA administrator, speaking about the clean energy plan and moving ahead. 60% of Colorado's electricity comes from coal. We heard it from the administrator's viewpoint. How does this all look to you from the viewpoint of the governor of Colorado?
Well, and again, Gina McCarthy is an interesting. She is someone who's been in the EPA for a number of years. She's also had experience, as she said, locally and working for a state. I find it very comforting that you got somebody who actually understands these regs and their impact on state officials. This new 111D, we're not sure yet, and we're still negotiating. And they've been very open to the negotiations. I don't think they're going to push it back another year, as some people hope. But they are very open to negotiations. We're worried that we don't get credit. We passed in 2009 the Clean Air, Clean Jobs bill, which is going to move us from, we were 70% 6 years ago, 70% coal. Now we're 60% coal. By 2017, we'll be 50% coal. Most of that has come from natural gas, which is obviously much cleaner and really almost comparable in cost these days. But also we're up to almost 20% in terms of wind energy. So we're moving towards a cleaner energy usage, and yet a lot of that happened before when the EPA is calibrating their rate of change. And so at least as it stands now, we're not getting credit for all the work we already did.
So your critique of it would be you shouldn't be penalized for being an early adapter.
Exactly. I think that if anything, we should be given credit, and the federal government should want to reward those early adapters so that they can go back to their citizens and say, hey, we did it here first. Here's the benefits of being first, and we should keep going.
Right. One of the questions that come up, we've talked about several of the issues, community impact of shale gas. We talked about methane. Another one is shale wastewater disposal, any threats of earth tremors, earthquakes in Colorado, and are you all looking at that?
Oh, sure. We have not had the same level of tremors that they've had in Oklahoma or other places, and it is a real concern. We have had tremors. We have slowed down the rate of injection. Again, I always want to emphasize the tremors are not from fracking. They're not from the production of oil and gas. They're from taking wastewater produced and injecting that down old wells under great pressure, and that is somehow getting onto fault planes and creating little bits of slippage. I think the bigger question we should be asking, I mean, as a country where almost a third of the country is in drought, almost all the time, it seems like, for the last 15 years, why are we not able to take that water and find a way to make it usable? Even if we can't make it potable, get it to a quality level that we can use it for growing wheat or hay, or somehow put it to use.
Yeah, and obviously water is an area calling out for a lot of innovation.
Exactly. I think there's huge opportunities there rather than injecting it. How can we figure some way to take the salinity and the impurities out of it so we can use it?
Well, one thing that's in addition to shale gas, tight oil that's produced legally in the state of Colorado, so is marijuana.
I can't believe that everybody finds a way. Here I am in an oil and gas conversation.
I know.
If you're taking, what are the chances that marijuana would be asked?
But we're going to tie it into economic development. What is bringing young people to your state? Is it economic opportunity, job creation, or is it marijuana?
You don't get the Pulitzer Prize for nothing. Just want to make sure that's clear. Well, first, Colorado has been the beneficiary over the last 10 years or 12 years of a great in-migration of millennials. I think it's due to several factors, as close as we can find out. The outdoor recreation opportunities, the hiking, the skiing, the bicycling has been a great magnet. I became mayor of Denver in 2003, and we kind of felt this coming, and we made a conscious effort to reduce or at least freeze property taxes for places that did live music. We wanted to become more of a destination for young people to move to, and we did. In Metro Denver now there are more live music venues than there are in Austin or Nashville. It's not part of our brand yet, but it will be. We have more statewide. We have more musicians per capita, professional musicians per capita than any other state, and this, having music and art and outdoor recreation and a high quality of life is a destination for young people more than it ever has been before. And what's interesting, it has made us a center of entrepreneurship. So we now, the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City did a study a year ago where they looked on a per capita basis, where are tech startups occurring? And 4 of the top 10 cities in America for tech startups per capita are in Colorado. And it's because of all these young people that come, and that's why marijuana got legalized, right? It wasn't all the soccer moms saying they were getting paranoid about getting caught. It was these young people coming in and saying, hey, what's the big deal? Why is it being treated so much differently than whiskey or beer? And why can't we get to a system of regulating it appropriately? And, that's, almost every elected official I know opposed it. You never want to be the first on one of these things, but it passed almost 60-40. And now we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we create regulations that work, that we make sure kids don't get it. If we can tax it properly so that we get rid of the drug dealers who don't care who they sell it to, I think we should be able to keep it out of the hands of kids. I think we should be able to, solve most of the challenges that we've been dealing with.
And of course, it's become a new entrepreneurial business.
It is sort of, it's a feedback loop, right, in terms of the entrepreneurs. It's not as big. People say it's a win. I tell other governors, let's wait and see what the unintended consequences are. And we're trying to reserve. This year we got a little over $70 million in tax revenue. I think next year will be over $100 million. We're trying to reserve that. The first $40 million goes to education, but we want to make sure, A, we have enough money to regulate it. If there are more addictions, kids slipping off the tracks, we want to make sure we have the resources to really help them get back on the track, that we can make sure there are unintended consequences and that we have the resources to take care of them where we do find them.
Yeah. Overall, you've having been in the private sector, you put a lot of emphasis on creating a business-friendly state. And as you said, brought in a lot of business. What are the kind of 2 or 3 big things you've done to create an environment that encourages investment in business?
Well, part of it is just changing the culture of government, and not just in regulators, but in everyone, that we're going to be pro-business, and that there's a way to be pro-business and encourage entrepreneurs and talk about them and make that part of your brand, but at the same time, making sure you're the first state to do methane regulation, that you're going to hold yourselves to the highest standards that you can have. And I think you can do both. Right. We also went and addressed how many regulations we have. And just like any large company, governments build up layer after layer of regulation. And so we just started we've gone through now over 16,000 regulations, and over half of them we've either eliminated or dramatically simplified. And as a way of trying to get friction out of the interface between business and government. We want more entrepreneurs to start businesses more easily. We want larger businesses or expanding businesses. We don't want to stand in any fashion. We don't want to be in the way of that expansion. So part of it is just trying to make sure that people know we're pro-business. B is out there rebranding the state, and C is actually, how do we expand capital, access to capital? Do we limit regulations? We put on have something called the Colorado Innovation Network, because innovation is such a big part of the modern economy. Colorado has 30 federal research laboratories, and then University of Colorado, Colorado State University, University of Denver, Colorado School of Mines. We took all their research labs and put them into one network, and then we do a 2-day summit at the end of August, and we bring all the ideas we can and mix that in with entrepreneurs and startups, and then bring venture capitalists and large corporations just to kind of mix up the ecosystem so it's communicating a little more fluidly. And
right.
That kind of stuff all helps business.
You're the head of the National Governors Association. 2016 now is pretty close, presidential election. Do you think any of these energy issues, energy, climate, fracking, will be issues in the election? And how do you see these questions playing out in the Democratic Party as we go into November of 2016?
Well, I think it will definitely be part of the political landscape. It's, again, the polarization. It's difficult to assess how big a role it'll play. Certainly the types of people, the segments of the Democratic Party that vote more commonly in primaries generally are the people that are more concerned about fracking, more anti-oil and gas, generally bring a bias into this particular debate. But I think there are going to be a lot of other issues that are going to balance it out. So I'm not sure it's going to have how big a role it's going to play. And I just ran for re-election last November, and was unabashed. I'm saying that I think we can do oil production and exploration safely. We've got to regulate it. We've got to make sure we keep the air and water clean, but we can do it. And there was a loud voice in Boulder, Colorado, and some of the more liberal parts of the state that were loud and saying, "How could you say that? And it's going to cost you in the election." Well, in that election, those liberal parts of the party supported me 96% or 97%. Right. So I don't think it's going to. I think Democrats are going to recognize they can differ over this, but still, once the election's over, they'll still get Democratic support.
So that gets us back to where we were at the beginning, which was in this politicized and polarized political world. How challenging is it to be a moderate?
Yeah. And tandem with that is how do you continue to persuade the people that are taking more extreme positions on, not just on this, but on a number of issues. And part of that is, it's funny, the more I've done on this, I think the best way to persuade someone to your point of view when they violently disagree is just to listen. And I spent 16 years in the brew pub business, in the restaurant business, and you learn tricks, and I think it works in politics. It takes more time, but when someone's really upset about something, the hot soup's been in their lap, you just repeat back to them what they said. The best way to persuade someone is to listen, and just to listen harder, repeat back what they're saying, and try to really hear what they're saying, oftentimes by expanding their perception of self-interest, where they benefit. If you can expand that large enough, then the self-interest of the different groups at the table begin to overlap. And that's when, in business, that's when you get transactions. In government, that's when you get agreement.
Right. So following from that, it seems from at least everything that we read and hear that in this election that all the putative rivals to Hillary Clinton in the Democratic Party are on the left, on the progressive wing of the party, liberal wing, populist, and with a strong anti-business cadence to it. Do you see a role for moderates be outside of Colorado in this election cycle?
In primaries, and
moderate candidates, I should say.
No, I understand, and I think the same is true in the Republican Party as in the Democratic Party. it is hard for moderates to get footing in a primary system that is in almost all states is skewed towards those more activist, and generally more extreme parts of the party. And by extreme, I just mean that they're further off on the political spectrum. So moderates generally don't have as large a voice in primaries as they do in elections, but there are still more moderates than there are people on the extreme. And if someone were ever able to motivate and activate the moderates of both parties, I think it could make a big difference.
Do you feel there is a moderate wing of the Democratic Party?
Sure. I think there's a large moderate wing. There's a tremendous number of people that are very pro-business. They just think that the government should work. They still believe in government. Maybe it should be smaller, but the government has a role in all kinds of functions within society, making sure there's more opportunity.
Right. Well, I think we should end up with one last question that came up from the audience, back to energy, back to the state of Colorado, which is, do you think Colorado's environmental goals for oil and gas are as viable at $50 a barrel as they were at $100 a barrel?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the issues, and that's come up a lot. As the price of oil collapses, do you want to give oil and gas producers a break and eliminate some of the commitments to reducing fugitive emissions? I think we need to work harder with them to make sure they can do it less expensively. But once you set a standard and a goal for this is what our clean air is going to be, or here's what our clean water is going to be, I think only a fool would back away from that, because then you begin to unravel the social contract by which oil and gas companies operate in your state. And I think the oil and gas companies understand that. No one has come to me and said we want relief from these methane regulations. They have said, well, we think we can get there by doing this, and the original regulation was this, and if we can get to the same place, can we move in that direction? There's a process to do that, and I support that process 100%. Let's figure out a way to get there with a lower cost, but let's not back off what our commitments to quality were.
Governor Hickenlooper, in your opening remarks, you began by pointing out what a large opportunity has been opened up, not just for your state, but for the United States by this unconventional revolution. At the same time, you've demonstrated in your remarks today and of your record as governor that you've been at the forefront in bringing the regulatory frameworks, modernizing, making sure it's in place so that this development can proceed in a sound and safe fashion, and that the two really go hand in hand. And so on behalf of everybody here and those watching this on the web, I want to thank you very much for coming to Columbia University today to share your thinking on these issues. And please join me in thanking him.
Thank you.